We're on all right.
I think so.
Did they start yet?
Should be starting in a few minutes. Hopefully, I will get their call.
You want anything?
Yeah, sure.
Everybody, welcome to HHH this week. Happy in advance Valentine's Day. We are going to talk a little bit about medieval romance, so hopefully, kind of get those vibes going. Um, I've got my lovely heart banner here, and if anybody would like one, like please do not hesitate. It is my greatest pleasure to just craft the night away therapy. So if you would like a banner, just let me know and just reach out to Bronxville and let me know, and I would be so happy to send you one. Today I have a very appropriate Southern French rosé, which is my normal go-to, and I've got a little frozen strawberry in. And this is appropriate because a lot of the documentation that we'll be talking about today comes from the south of France, from this culture of sort of uh, ravenous fascination with Amor, the god of love, and sort of the sensuality of life that we characterize with the South. So, hello everybody. Hi Diane. Hi Eric. Hi Rinda. Hi Malcolm. Oh, hi Malcolm. You're across the street. Yeah, so let's get started. And oh, Codex, I love this image. Beautiful. Is it Saint Lucia? You're muted. Oh my goodness, and Patty's got Adelina. Hi, baby. She'll if I can convert her to a medievalist, like Connor's probably like, Hi, Bubba. Oh, what a sweetheart. So we will start today with our fascinating examples of medieval romances. So we're going to be talking about um, the idea of romance, as well as a couple of our sort of bona fide, verified love stories. And so I hope you guys all enjoy this. All right, let me just get situated here. Oops, sorry. Eh, cheers. So sorry. Okay. Welcome to History Happy Hour. I'm Christine. We're going to talk about romancing the Middle Ages. And I would be very interested in kind of hearing your thoughts about how the idea of romance has kind of become something that is like one of these very strong links between past and present. Like, even if we think about rom-coms, like I often, when I teach this topic to my students, I'm like, what about Shrek? So there's this element that kind of clings to us. And I would be very curious to hear sort of your interpretation of how this kind of narrative has impacted your life or your expectations of your relationships, etc. So next time we're going to be talking about medieval winged creatures. And this is partially because I'm obsessed with birds. And also this is going to be my birthday month. So hopefully we will have you guys back for March 18th and kind of talking about angels and celestial bodies, as well as birds and bestiaries and other kinds of, uh, you know, creatures that take to the sky. So I hope to see you then. So I just want to start with some etymology, as I always try to. My students are like, "Can you just teach us the thing?" Um, the idea of romance is inextricably linked from the language of the people. So this kind of gives us a really fascinating input into who the audience for these love stories would be, right? This is not something that the clerics, the educated, those speaking Latin are really fascinated with. This is something that people want to hear. People want to hear it performed, accompanied with music, and brought into their common space, and not something that's sort of cloistered and sequestered. So, starting circa 1300, the romance, a story written or recited in verse, telling of the adventures of a knight, hero, etc. Often one decided principally for entertainment, from Old French romance, verse narrative, modern French roman, also the vulgar language. So vulgus meaning the language of the people, the peoples, the crowd. So right away, this situates these love stories kind of in the everyman's grasp. And I think that that's a really important element because these are not like highfalutin, highbrow storylines. These are things that people can relate to. And that's something that we should keep in the back of our minds when we think about this as a genre. And so here on the right-hand side, you have the Codex Minas. And those of you who know me, like, you know that I have my, that's the back of my phone case is the Codex Minas, because this is one of the examples of just kind of the most beautiful courtly love imagery that we have from the 14th century. And just, I could, like, you're going to see a couple images from it during the course of this lecture, but just the beauty and the simplicity. And that begs the question of what do we attribute to true romance, right? So, like, I grew up on the Fox Robin Hood of Disney, right? And so for me, him and Maid Marian, and when she has that little flower ring and the lightning bug flies out of it and glows, like, to me, that is like peak romance. But I'd be very interested to kind of hear from you guys, like what relates to you in terms of these stories, because they persist and their longevity, I think, is one of the testaments to our connection to the Middle Ages. So here you have two more examples of kind of gift giving as part of this love narrative. Literally in this left-hand image, she's giving her heart to this soldier, to this gentleman. And we can also see that he has other sort of nods to, I don't even know how to phrase this, iconography. But she's literally handing over her heart. And then here on this side, on the right, you have this woman who's giving over the symbol of this knight's knighthood, right, as this symbolic element of his whole armor, but with a swan on top. So, like, how do we sort of deconstruct these? How do we figure out what kinds of messages are being sent in these images? So we have to immediately go to one of the founders of the idea of courtly love. And just to give a little bit of backstory, courtly love is something that is practiced by the elite. This is not peasants' love. This is not lust. This is something that is born of the higher elements. So sight, especially sight-coded or mental attraction, rather than physical, sort of the eros, the physicality that drives lust, essentially. So we go to a chaplain who was associated with the court of Marie de France, the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine. And in his Art of Love, which is based on Ovid's first century text, we have this description of what true love really is. Love is a certain inborn suffering derived from the sight of, so again, the hierarchy of senses, and excessive meditation, which is really, if we think about it, a sort of spiritual term, right? We have monks meditating on texts and on images. Meditation upon the beauty of the opposite sex. And if we're going to fold back and kind of view this through a medieval lens, we have to understand that beauty in physicality is representative of beauty interiorly. So we have an expression of one's virtue, of one's grace, of one's value physically manifested. So the beauty of the opposite sex, which causes each one to wish above all things the embraces of the other, and by common desire to carry out all of love's precepts in the other's embrace. So there is a physicality, but this is not the purpose of this kind of love. This kind of love is psychological. This kind of love is linked by like spirits. Love causes a rough and uncouth man to be distinguished for his handsomeness. It can endow a man, even of the humblest birth, with nobility of character. It blesses the proud with humility, and the man in love becomes accustomed to performing many services gracefully for everyone. Oh, what a wonderful thing is love, which makes a man shine with so many virtues and teaches everyone, no matter who he is, so many good traits of character. And the message behind this is that love ennobles. Love can transform. And this is exactly where we get like the narrative of Pygmalion, right? Or My Fair Lady. love can transform you into something beautiful and virtuous and kind and smooth around the edges. Whereas before love, you might have been sort of looked askance upon or disregarded, right? But love enables you to kind of come into the fullness of your worth. And so Andreas Kapellanis really gives us this portion of it, which then subsequently reflects in these kind of games that the women at the courts of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Marie de France are Marie de Champagne, sorry, uh, authors, that they're playing these games where they're bringing men forward and accusing them of certain misdemeanors, and as a result, you have to bring a dozen roses, say a prayer, etc. So there's this sense of accountability that also comes with like not living up to your fullness of this beautified version of yourself that you could be. So I think it's a really positive, like not positive, all right, I'm gonna shoot myself in the foot here, but there's an upreaching that's associated with this ideal of medieval love that I think we can all derive from in this day and age. Just be that person, be that bigger person. And so also from the Codex Manesse, we have this gorgeous image that shows the elite status of these figures because we have the falcon, right? And this is something that falconry is something that is associated with the nobility, that is limited to the nobility, but then also the reciprocity of their expressions. And I love in particular that if you go to the city of Carcassonne, there's a huge mural of this particular image from the Codex Manesse. And I've posed with it in front of it with Mallory, with Eric, like all my loved ones. But just this idea that the two faces are aligned and equal and just so encompassed with each other. And I think that that is like part and parcel of the kind of the message of medieval love and medieval romance is that you can pair to each other, and I just think that that is absolutely beautiful. All right, moving on to the ivories. So this is the top of a box that some of you have already seen in HHH, and I'll show you some of the other panels in a moment. But what we're seeing here is this trope called the attack on the castle of love. So this is now reframing romance and love in the vocabulary of battle. So you can see illicit touches, stolen smooches, the use of actual siege weaponry. So for example, we've got a sort of trebuchet situation going on here. And then in the center, these four panels here are showing a tournament. So in the earlier period, tournaments were a way for willing lords to kind of figure out like who would be the best on the battlefield. And then over time, with the introduction of courtly love in the 12th and 13th century, we start to see these as being very codified, very ritualized experiences. And this is where you get like the ladies, dangling their handkerchiefs. This is what you're starting to see in what's his name? Help me, somebody. The windmill.
Oh, Don Quixote.
Yes, thank you. Words are real sometimes. Right, so this sense that like chivalry is associated with doing something in service of a woman, right? So we have this idea, and you can see these women like disgruntled as they may look, but they're overwatching this charge between these two groups that are fighting in this tournament. And then we have also the introduction of the element of using non-trajectory items as weapons. And this is, for me, one of my favorite elements of this. And I always show my students this. the attack on the Castle of Love. And you can see that they're using, in lieu of oil, whatever kind of, hot object that they're pouring through what are literally called murder holes, they're using flowers. And so the women who are coming out um, underneath, they're brandishing these weapons that have flowers on the end. And so the portcullis itself, yeah, all right, we have that. That's going to be at the beginning of the front of every fortified structure. But these women are leading this force with nothing but branches with flowers on the end. And then if we look up in the corners, we can see again that women are sort of engaging, suggestively maybe, but like also rebuffing these men. Um, and then we have Cupid right here at the center. So this idea that this is a castle that is being defended, that needs to be defended because the woman's virtue cannot just be seized without a fair fight. So I'll leave that where it is, but I do love the imagery and even the fact that they have roses on their shields as they're invading this particular palace. And then even just like this little caress here and here. Like I don't know, there's something deeper. And this would have been an object that a woman would have owned. This is actually a mirror back. And so this means that this would be a private possession, something close to her heart, something that she would look at daily. This is not something in a museum. This is not I mean, it is now, but like it's not something that is supposed to be showcased. This is a private object. And that intimacy, I think, underscores the romance that we're talking about. So we're moving now to a couple of pairs of lovers that have just seized my attention since I became a medievalist. And we're going to start with Abelard and Eloise. And so these are a pair of scholars who kind of were thrown together. Eloise, probably in her early 20s, encountered Abelard probably around 37 years old because her uncle wanted her to be educated. And so he chose one of the most phenomenal, charismatic professors of his day. And Abelard was associated with the University of Paris. So Abelard moves into the home where Eloise is. And over the course of time, they develop an affair. She has a child, and everything kind of goes south with Abelard's castration. So I'll just put a pin in that for now and we'll get to it. But what I really want to focus on is the language that they use for each other. And this is true romance. There are all of these stories from the Gothic period, the Victorians, where the idea is that, like, in the tomb, when Abelard had already been buried for X amount of years, opened his arms for Eloise to be placed in the same tomb. And so they're buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. And I just noticed like that my shirt is actually like very similar to the background of this. Not intentional, but love it. So Eloise writes to Abelard, and they have this correspondence of 7 letters back and forth after Abelard kind of lays out the drama of their relationship, the castration, his decision to turn to theology instead of philosophy, and really essentially rebuffing Eloise. And I was texting with one of my best friends earlier, and I remembered at my wedding that she was like, did you quote Eloise in your vows? And it's like, yep. And I love you so much for knowing that. Like, so this is a story that's very close to my heart. So Eloise writes to Abelard after she gets this scathing letter that he's circulated publicly. You know, beloved, as the whole world knows how much I have lost in you. And after she gives birth to their child, she is essentially forced into monastic life, and Abelard too goes into monastic life, but I don't think she wanted it. And so she has this romantic ideal that doesn't come to fruition because of the politics of the day. And so this is one of the real tragedies of the Middle Ages because their love is absolutely palpable. Like, just wait for this. Abelard writes to her, "What more do I need to say? With our books open before us, we exchanged more words of love than of lessons, more kisses than concepts. My hands wandered more to her breasts than our books, and love turned our eyes to each other more than reading kept them on the page." And she writes back, "Everything we did, and also the times and places, are stamped on my heart along with your image, so that I live through it all again with you, even in holy places before the altar. So even times that she's been inducted into monastic life and she's the abbess of Abelard's location called the Paraclete that he kind of sets up for her, she still is clinging to this longing just to be with him. Even into holy places before the altar, I carry the memory of our love. And far from lamenting for having been seduced by pleasures, I sigh for having lost them." So there is not any apologetic bone in Eloise's recounting of her love affair with Abelard. And I think this is why, through the Victorian era, like, this story has just held such clout and such uh what's the word I want? Like vibrancy. Um because this is a love that hasn't died. And even though she's separated from him, even though he's been castrated, they're apart in different monasteries, she's writing these letters to him. And there's a section that I often teach where she talks about having the physical letter that he wrote to her and that she can hold it and she can caress it. And there's a physicality that is associated with like this piece of parchment. And like, there are no words for how strong these emotions were. And she writes to him again. And this image, which is an 18th century image, which incidentally is by a female painter, which kind of gives it a little bit of an interesting take, where Eloise is being entered into the convent, Abelard looking like a sort of dandy, barely holding on to her, but she is so remorseful and so regretful of this decision. She says, "God knows I never sought anything in you except yourself. I wanted simply you, nothing of yours." So at this point, Abelard has profound fame, profound reputation, money coming in from his students at the University of Paris, cachet in every sense of the word. But she looked for no marriage bond. But you kept silent about most of my arguments for preferring love to wedlock and freedom to chains. God is my witness that if Augustus, emperor of the whole world, thought fit to honor me with marriage and conferred all the earth on me to possess forever, it would be dearer and more honorable to me to be called not his empress, but your whore. And we can perhaps work on the terminology of this, but the idea is that she freely wanted him to love her every day and not to be bound to her by an oath of marriage. And I think that this is like one of the true romances, and she got deprived of it, but that freedom, I think, is the takeaway. Like, the freedom to love who she loves and the freedom to be able to just sacrifice everything else in her life in order to love who she loves, even if it didn't turn out right. So, yeah. She writes again to him, "I'm no longer ashamed that my passion had no bounds for you. If that were a crime, it is a crime I am yet fond of. So there's a part of Eloise that loves the romance, that loves bucking against tradition and expectations and everything that's forced upon her as a woman in the Middle Ages. And she embraces it. She is not sorry for 1 second. And I think that this is like the true brand of feminism, the true brand of like self-serving identity where she does not apologize for the way that she feels for her lover. I, who have experienced so many pleasures in loving you, feel, in spite of myself, that I cannot repent them, nor forbear through memory to enjoy them over again. Whatever efforts I use, on whatever side I turn, the sweet thought still pursues me. And every object brings to my mind what it is my duty to forget. So, as the abbess of the Paraclete, this monastery, this convent that Abelard had set up for her, she's supposed to shun all of this, and she just cannot. And I resonate so much with her ability to speak for herself in this moment that is so difficult. We have so few sources from women in this time, and then to get something like this, whatever efforts I use, on whatever side I turn, the sweet thought still pursues me, and every object brings to my mind what it is my duty to forget. During the quiet night, when my heart ought to be asleep, ought to be still in that sleep which suspends the greatest cares, I cannot avoid the illusions of my heart. I dream that I am still with my dear Abelard. So I am just going to leave that there for you as one of these immortal romances that we are just so lucky to have evidence of. So moving on now to another romantic couple, and this is a legendary couple. This is Tristan and Isolde. And we can see that in the Victorian period, there was a real fascination with these kind of will they, won't they kind of relationships where we never really get that sort of sense of consummation that we see with, like, for example, Guinevere. And this tension that is associated with longing and desire that is never fulfilled. So we have Edmund Leighton's painting on the right-hand side, and he is one of our, I'm going to show you another image in a second, but he's one of our kind of really fascinating, Victorian artists who is summoning up everything that is sort of over dramatized in terms of how the Victorians viewed the Middle Ages, right? Everything is clean and pristine and, funded by and fueled by these really profound emotions, which suits our idea of romance, right? Like, you're going to do everything for the girl or whatever. And so in this case, we have actually her husband lurking in the background, watching his nephew seduce his wife. And then in this early 14th century Ivory, we have the same scenario where we have Thisbe, Pyramus, and then the specter of King Mark, who is the uncle who's actually married to Thisbe, overwatching, pulling back these branches. And I think this is such a fascinating piece. This is actually at the cloisters, because associated with this image, we have the betrayal of the unicorn in the arms of the maiden, and then his execution by the male who comes. So the narrative composition is linking these two stories. So there's this sense of kind of surveillance or spying, essentially, which is the downfall of this particular love affair. And then we have also nope, did I screw up Pyramus and Thisbe with, ah, hold on, sorry. I might have Tristan and Isolde, yeah. Sorry. Um, the first story was Tristan and Isolde. Sorry. This is not my finest moment. So this is Pyramus and Thisbe. The first one was Tristan and Isolde. So Tristan essentially was sort of a foreigner, and he wound up um becoming like inculcated in this doomed affair. And we have Pyramus and Thisbe. I'm so sorry. And this is from Ovid from the first century, but in the stories, this dates back to Babylon. So you can see in this fresco from actually in Pompeii that we have this ruined body of Pyramus and the lion in the background. And so the longer version of the story is that they were supposed to meet, and Thisbe dropped her gown, her cloak, and a lion who had just come from a feast had eaten it. And so there's blood on the fabric. And so when Pyramus gets there, he thinks that Thisbe is dead. And so his solution is to fall on his own sword. So we have that version in this first century image where Thisbe is now approaching the dead Pyramus. But in the medieval version, and this is the exact same coffer or the exact same casket that you just saw, we can see them falling together on the sword. And here's the lion gnawing upon her garment. So this is changing the story of the romance from a sacrifice and somebody grieving to a mutual sacrifice. And I think that this speaks very highly to, or highly, but speaks deeply to a medieval culture where self-sacrifice, as we see in the Song of Roland, as we see in all of these historical narratives about the Crusades, like where that is the biggest value, that is the biggest contribution you can make is sacrificing. And so the fact that this would have been a box that maybe a woman would have had love notes in or jewelry, this was clearly something that was a gift from a lover in the romantic context. And then for this story to be paramount on the front of it, and it would have been recognizable because these stories were in circulation in spite of the fact that they were recorded in the first century. But to link the selflessness, I think, is something that persists in our ideas of the ideal love affair. And here's another image, possibly attributed to Nicolas Poussin, but possibly also attributed to his brother-in-law. And you can see Pyramus and Thisbe, Thisbe running towards Pyramus's body. But all around is this chaotic darkness. And here we see the city of Babylon in the background and these just little spurts of red that, bring to mind bloodshed and all of the fear associated with the lion's attack, etc. So there's sort of a wariness and a fear that's associated with this perfect love story and this love story that is doomed. And, we see that play out in the reality of Abelard and Eloise, and we see it play out in these stories that have persisted with us as examples of romance that it's just not functional. So I want to turn back to Edmund Leighton, who in the Victorian era is really focused on, and some of you may have seen these images before, he's really focused on the sort of cleaned up version of chivalric love. So we have this beautiful woman with her hair plaited, gold and white, right? These virtue signifying colors. We've got flowers blooming, and we have this stoic knight who's about to set off to battle. And then this little subtle, okay, there's a dragon, like we're we're focusing on sort of the martial element, the power, the might of this individual. And so in both of these images, we have the woman in kind of this dominant position. And in this image on the right-hand side, which is the Accolade, which is one of Leighton's most famous demonstrations of medieval culture, you can see a soldier being knighted by this woman. And in the background, we have all this whole group of people who are witnessing this, which would have been the case. But again, she's got this circlet of gold, she's got this girdle, she's demure and, exquisitely dressed and placid in every element. Like she is a queen, right, in this image. And he's on his knees in front of her. So this image is extending this idea that women can deign to elect men in certain capacities. But in 2006, we have an individual who photoshopped this particular image. And so instead of having this man be subjected to this woman who has the authority to knight him, she is now put down. You can't see the sword at all. The figures in the back are kind of distorted, right? Because they were higher than the knight. And a parable about the hearts of fathers and daughters. So I just kind of wanted to illustrate how the idea of a medieval romance can be manipulated and twisted to something that it just isn't. And we have to be kind of on the watch for this. This is something that we as critical thinkers have to kind of be aware of. So let's go to some pieces of advice and some beautiful words of love before I close out. So from the Distaff Gospels, and this is a great source for kind of medieval advice, how-tos in all kinds of different scenarios. A young woman who wishes to know the name of her future husband should stretch out the first thread which she has spun that day at her door, and then find out the name of the first man to pass by. She can be certain that this will be the name of her husband. So again, linking women to this domestic sphere, but with this kind of old wives' tale kind of version of how to find your mate. And I've included the Lattrell Psalter here to kind of show this inversion of the male-dominated domestic sphere where the woman is actually going to attack with her distaff and spindle. From our favorite 70-something-year-old man to his teenaged wife from the Ménagier de Paris, I believe that when two good and honest people are married, all other affections, except their love for each other, are withdrawn, annulled, and forgotten. It seems to me that when they are together, they look at each other more than they look at others. So again, this hierarchy of senses, the idea of the gaze as being instrumental in creating that bond of love, they come together and embrace each other. And they would rather talk and communicate with each other than with anyone else. When they are separated, they think of each other. All their special pleasures, greatest desires, and perfect joys are in pleasing and obeying each other. But if they don't love one another, they have no more than a routine sense of duty and respect for each other, which is not enough between many couples. So compared to the kind of give all, be all romantic narrative that we're seeing in Tristan and Isolde and Pyramus and Thisbe and Abelard and Eloise, this sense of kind of just the routine, right, is not desirable for this idea of actual romance. It has to be more than this. And then sorry, when we turn to the women who were writing poetry, you get such a more sensual element, which is almost surprising or baffling, but very appreciated as a historian. So the Contessa de Dia is one of our troubadours in the 13th century who is just being a mouthpiece for women in love. Would that my knight might one night lie naked in my arms and find himself in ecstasy with me as his pillow. For I am more in love with him than Floris was with Blanchefleur. So these are, again, characters from a romance, a contemporary romance. To him I give my heart and love, my reason, eyes, and life. So again, the connection between the visual attraction and kind of this inextricable, inexplainable devotion that we're seeing. And here we have two lovely nuns writing to each other. To C, sweeter than honey or honeycomb. B sends all the love there is to her love. You who are unique and special, why do you make delays so long, so far away? So this nun is asking why the other nun has been vacated from the monastery for so long. Right. Why do you want your only one to die? Who, as you may know, loves you with soul and body. This is one of my favorite lines in medieval literature. Who sighs for you at every hour, at every moment, like a hungry little bird. In you is all gentleness, all perfection. So my spirit languishes perpetually by your absence. You are devoid of the gall of any faithlessness. You are sweeter than milk and honey. You are peerless among thousands. I love you more than any. You alone are my love and longing, you, the sweet cooling of my mind. No joy for me anywhere without you. All that was delightful with you is wearisome and heavy without you. No words, just no notes. This is the purity of romance. And I'll just end on this kind of humorous note here for you guys. So this is from a collection of advice. So take note. Friend, when you're dancing, be careful not to belch, for if you belch, you will be a real pig. Furthermore, never fart while you're dancing. Grit your teeth and compel your arse to hold back the fart. Do not have a dripping nose and do not dribble at the mouth. No woman desires a man with rabies. And that is the takeaway, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much for joining me on this kind of romp through true love and less than true love and the ideas that we have behind. But I would love to hear from you. Is like we see these tropes time and time again, and we expect certain things, right? Like the coup de foudre, the lightning bolt that we see in The Godfather, like these elements that signify real love. But like, what can we take away from the predecessors of our 12th and 13th century people who are struggling to quantify and qualify this kind of love, like this love that will last, that matters. So I throw it out to you. Yeah, I'm gonna pause recording